So just to give you a bit of an impression, that would be natural for me to start with any speech would be in a language I did my entire education in. I've not done any English education in my life. So that's just been my basically acquisition. That's my third language, right? But the main point of today, the goal is I want to show you how to speak any language in the least amount of seconds. And here is my short story. I'm married to a Japanese woman. I have two gorgeous kids. I really recommend interracial marriage. Those of you who are still single, it's really awesome. The kids turn out really beautiful. And they're trilingual. They're currently, the English is their main language, funny enough. And I live in Slovenia. We have a company now of about 140 people, Language Magic Adventures. We've been for 10 months on the American market. And America seemed to love us enough that I decided to now spend 3 months here to kind of get to know you better and make some friends and understand, how this whole world looks like here, so we can really serve you better. And one more thing about me is I love America. I really, really, really love America. You may hear all sorts of opinions about, I don't know, from Europeans or Asians or whatever, but from my perspective, America is the only country in the world with balls. If any of your ideals is ever threatened somewhere, you may have interest there or not, you're going to be there. Yeah. That was my experience in 1991 when Serbia attacked us when we wanted to be independent as Slovenia. Americans were straight on our side because that was the will of the people. We wanted to be independent, and that was one of the reasons we had a 10-day war, Slovenia. So America strongly supported us at that time to actually become independent. So I just want you guys to know that you may not be aware of that, but you live in a country that's admired by many people. I'm one of them. And for that reason, I've actually said that's one of my life missions to support America's connection with the world. And that's why. Language Magic Adventures in America, which I think is the best technology in the world. So I want to bring it first here. And so in my case, my sad story about languages was learning German for 6 years in high school, college, and then I was about to flunk the exam, and I flunked the exam. I was about to actually repeat the year of university because I couldn't say 5 sentences in German after studying for 6 years, right? And what I thought at 19 is that I'm too old for languages. Don't know if you ever had that thought that you're too old and probably not talented. That was the thought that I started having. Later, when I spent another couple of weeks in Italy, learning no Italian, another couple of weeks in France, learning no French, another couple of weeks in Spain, learning no Spanish, I was really proven that I'm obviously too old because the talent has been gone. Obviously, it's okay, Slovenian, Croatian, English, age 19, over, right? So I was lucky to actually find somebody in America. Don't know if you know, but you have these learning retreats and the different learning facilitators. And one of them was Millicent Sinclair in Atlanta, Georgia. And she actually took the time to help me understand that language acquisition has nothing to do with talent. That it's a process. She introduced me to a concept called polyglots. They are obviously people who speak multiple languages. They are all over the world. It's about 0.01% of population. They are no different than anybody else. The only thing that's different for them, they have different techniques. So that was inspiring for me. And I could actually also learn the language, right? And so I entered Mexico, and with a mission that I'm going to finally speak Spanish. So I remember the first words after a month of learning. I was like, hola, no puedo hablar no mucho español, pero estoy learning, estoy aprendiendo. That was my Spanish when I started, right? And so I did I used the techniques that she showed me because what's really clearly, Millicent told me, it was very language magic adventure. So just a few things that she showed me. And those few things I started using on the way to Mexico. I don't have enough time to actually go into the techniques, but basically, I started using the forces, like force of mimicking, really get into the melody of the language, then force of relationships, and really kind of getting related to people in a language. And a combination of that in 10 weeks got me to be in a house with, I was in a house with an older lady speaking English, good English, and her husband speaking no English. And he was of particular interest to me because he was in India. I was in a spiritual journey at that time. I was really like, I was really looking for answers as to what's true and all that. So I really wanted to talk to him. And then actually one morning I woke up exactly like Millicent told me, that after like a couple of weeks, there's like a spike in a language. And what happened was I had dreams in Spanish. I woke up, I said, buenos dias. I woke up to the man and started talking to him. And we just talked and hours and days, and he would share with me about the meditation, about the circular nature of time, about what is my spirit is, it's crazy. He was my mentor, right? He became one of my mentors of the journey. It was really crazy. And that's that experience I will never forget that got me into languages, because at that time I experienced something I now call multilingual heaven. Being in a new language, deeply related to another human being that I would have never been related otherwise, and just learning from them, relating to them, experiencing their world. So that's something that got me addicted. Since then, I met most of the world's polyglots. I worked with Stephen Kaufman. I worked with Gabriel Weiner. I worked with Ida Osanes. Anybody who's in polyglots and languages, you may know them. So they're some of the most popular people in the world. Steve Kaufman speaks 18 languages. He was my mentor. With him, I built a business in Japan. I worked with more than 5,000 people, really one-on-one. So I have recordings of people really going from day 1 to day 2, day 3, day 4. The amount of this stuff we have, we're probably the biggest language laboratory after Pimsleur in 1950. So we have massive amount of video evidence and evidences of the things that didn't work. So I tried a lot of things that didn't work. So basically that got me hooked. And I learned a couple of things that I want to share with you today. You ready? Yes. So just to finish that story up, actually, with Spanish, what happened, I went to Cuba, I had another breakthrough, and that's when I realized that the language acquisition and the journey to fluency happens in breakthroughs. It doesn't happen like linearly, like you're going to just do little by little, and then, no, it happens like poof, and then it's a jump, and it's always a jump when something meaningful happens. Like when I was in Cuba, after about a week of being there, not understanding Cuban Spanish, there was like a moment when, paf, this breakthrough happened again. I just started understanding everything, speaking at a new level. Then I went on to having a girlfriend in Mexico, which didn't make any difference to my Spanish. I was already fluent, because the lovers are the worst people to actually have for language partners, because you're interested in everything else than deep conversations in the beginning. You want to have other things, especially the short relationships. But what happened was she was into books. Now, books, when you're already very fluent in spoken language, books is the best thing you can do. So I read about 5 thick books in Spanish with her. And her sister was in 3rd grade. And what people do in 3rd grade, they learn grammar of their own language, right? So the grammar of the language is the worst idea if you begin with the language. That's going to stop you from ever speaking. So don't do that if you haven't yet started. That's really the worst idea. Or vocabulary list. That's really, really, really bad. That's going to really stop you from speaking. But after you're fluent and read a couple of books, the grammar is the perfect next step. So I wrote a 16-page summary of my project at that time. Confirmed it with Launam University. It was really awesome. And then after all that, for whatever reason, different reasons, that girlfriend left me. Now, she was not the only girl that ever left me. But this time was the first time I was sad in Spanish. And yeah, it wasn't funny, but the thing is, I went to the center of Mexico City, and in my sadness, what people do when they're sad, I don't know, but I wrote poem for her, right? So I crafted, it was a whole day I used to really craft a beautiful poem. So I came to her a couple of days later. I declared that poem to her, right? It was about kind of a deep relationship, a friendship, I think it was a beautiful poem. She listened to it, she was moved, there was a tear there. And then I said, mira, Tania, si, ¿sabes qué? Para mí, tú eres una persona muy importante. Y yo que quiero es que pues gastamos un poco de tiempo juntos, unos 2-3 semanas, y después vamos a viajar un poco antes de que me vaya para Japón. ¿Cómo te parece eso? And she said yes, which was like I invited her on a trip, and she said yes. So we just made our relationship way profounder. And we just really left as best friends, that trip, right? And that was actually happened in 6 months. So that relationship with Spanish, as you just noticed, that happened in 6 months, was a pure language acquisition. And I could have done it in 3 months if I had a guide, yeah? But I didn't. So anyways, moving to another country does not mean you will speak a new language, but actually doing the proper things mean that you will. So here's some of the language apps you probably know that they don't work. Whoever tried, who has like a really long streak on some app, you won't speak much after that. So there are other things that work. And also, the one fundamental concept you need to understand with language is that the learning doesn't work. You can learn the laws of your state. You can learn the list of states and their capitals, right? New York, Albany, and all that. You can do that, but you cannot, for the sake of humanity, learn a language. It's too many connections that you need to keep in your memory, remembering. Like, how will you remember, ich möchte Deutsch sprechen, möchte. How will you remember together with all the right words? And it's just impossible. So when you speak, I don't know how you speak, but I don't think when I'm speaking. When I speak a language, I speak. I don't think. The thinking is a completely separate process to speaking. So trying to figure out in your brain what you're going to say next, that's not speaking the language. The only speaking the language is you get on the stage like that, which you actually would need to do in our language school after 28 days, every single time. You need to get on the stage and have a 10 or 15-minute speech in language. That's the only way you can really show that you speak and be fluent at it. Otherwise, it's not speaking the language, it's something else. So the learning doesn't work, but the secret to really speaking the foreign language is, drum roll, anyone? Language acquisition is a term that you may hear before, because in 1977, a famous guy, Stephen Krashen at that time, not coined it, but he massively popularized it. And what we did really, with the language acquisition that started with Stephen Krashen, and with really good methodologies and correct use of forces, that's what happens is a language hyperacquisition, which is something I hope to stand for a Nobel Prize in 2034 for that very reason. The language hyperacquisition, how it works, is it literally takes seconds to acquire the language. Do you want guys to try? Should I try it on you with something? Sure. Okay, so let me just check who speaks this language. I'm going to try to train you in a bit. これは日本語です。もし何でものことについて日本語ではできるけど、多分何もわからないね。Can you understand? No. Do you know which language is that? Japanese. Exactly, Japanese. How do you know? Cool. So what would you say if we take 1 second, obviously it's going to take more than a second because we're going to explain that second, but if we take 1 second for you to acquire a piece of Japanese, would you then start believing that your brain is actually capable of acquiring something? Yes. Good. So here's the deal. For you to have a Japanese conversation, you would need to have about 300 pieces of the language together. And then you can have like a 5-minute conversation, right? About 300 pieces, okay? Each language piece will go in 3 levels. So the first level is you understanding that. So if somebody tells you, "Mite kore," you'd know what I just said. You don't know what I just said, right? So first step is understanding. The second step, which will not happen today, it happens like after usually a cycle of sleep, after you've been in that context again, what happens is you start mumbling that. You start trying to say it, and you kind of say it to some extent wrong, but that's really okay. That's the next stage, is you voice it in such a way that you're understandable. The third stage is being completely fluent and masterful in every piece, right? And those pieces of language, they actually come together as a totality, and that totality then mixes with all another, right? Okay, so let's try. So I'm going to say something, and then just kind of follow me and see what your body will do and all that, right? So, mite kore. Mite. Look, mite kore.
Look over there.
Mite kore, that. Mite kore. So now just relax and just notice your body. Demo. Mite kore. You see how you moved, right? Because you started understanding what I just said. So what happened was it took about 0.2 seconds for you to hear it as a noise. You broke our Warneka region, just kind of turned it down as a non-relevant. But just before you turned it down, you got to know what each component meant. So 0.1 second for mite, that's look. Okay, so then 0.1 second for kore, that. Then it took 0.2 seconds for your brain to create the first mental model of Japanese. The entire, if you've ever seen ChatGPT, you know how intelligence works. You just created the entire way of saying that in Japanese with a set of verb and another word, and that entire thing just got created in your brain. That took about 0.2 seconds. Then it took another 0.1 seconds to put it together. Understand? So it took about 0.8 seconds for you to acquire that to the first level. Now you need about 300 of those pieces, and you need them at 3 levels, right? So it does take more than 1 second. But from now on, some of you will even be able to say it when somebody says, how do you say, look at that? Try. You see, for some of you, it's a bit going to be faster. So maybe you already have some exposure to Japanese sounds and whatever just kind of comes up. Those others recognize. So that's how language hyperacquisition works. It's extremely fast. And just to go quickly through, so there are the techniques and there are forces, right? So the one thing I want you to leave this presentation with, and I'm going to ask for 5 more minutes if that's okay, is maybe it's also applicable in other things, not only languages, but if you want to acquire languages, you need to stop trying, like effort. The effort will never get you to speak the language. Never, ever, ever. There's no amount of studying techniques, memorization technique that will ever have you speak the language. Like I just speak my 3rd language, English. Never. Never, ever, ever, ever. But if you start leaning onto the forces that are already there, that have always been there, that got you to speak the language you speak, if you start leaning onto those forces, that's really awesome. And that's going to take you there with very little effort. And the first force here is force of mimicking. So the force of mimicking is using your natural ability and your mirror neurons in your brain to start mimicking people and in situations that you wanna be like them, right? For example, but I'm not going to go deep into that. I want to go deep in something else. We don't have time. The second part is force of relationship. Let's do this second force deeper. So the relationship, what we figured out is that it takes 8 hours of being with a person who's genuinely related to you, who genuinely want to get to know you, and you genuinely want to get to know them. It takes 8 hours for you to have a breakthrough in a language. 8. No more. After 8 hours, like what we use is social psychology as well to know which questions you're going to ask each other. We kind of create it in a really hyper-intense manner. But 8 hours spread over 4 weeks is sufficient to have the massive breakthrough. Massive breakthrough meaning being on stage for 10 minutes in Spanish, getting more Spanish than you got in the entire high school. That's what actually, and the force of relationship, what our clients continuously say is the best thing, is them got really related to the people they speak with. And the one thing is, without that relationship, you won't be able to ever acquire a language. I don't know how many people here speak Latin, or if you know anybody who speaks Latin.
Pig Latin.
Huh?
Pig Latin.
Latin.
Pig Latin. Pig Latin. It was a joke.
Okay. No problem. Yeah, but you see, but why do you think nobody speaks Latin in the world fluently?
It's not spoken anywhere.
Because nobody else speaks it. So as long as there's nobody else that spoke to you in a language, you can't really speak the language. You can just have a couple of learned phrases like the states and capitals, right? But more, you never go beyond that without really having a person. And once you have a person with whom you had some kind of relationship with, business partnership, lover, friend, or even an enemy, doesn't matter, but somebody you had in the language a real emotional connection, what happens is that the transmission of the being comes from one person to another, right? And in that way you start being. So even in my case, I'm being an English speaker. I'm not speaking English as an act. I'm being an English speaker and the English is falling off me. That's really what happens with the language acquisition, right? And so this is the force of relationship. Then we have the force of input, which is the thing you can only input the language that you get something in a language. So if you get a story that you're interested in, that story will impact having the language in your brain, sedimented it. And the next force is force of expression. So every single time that you actually have to speak for a certain amount of time, that's really creating that force. And that's whatever the language got sedimented in the seconds that you did the acquisition before gets pushed to the forefront. And then there's a force of commitment. So what happens is whomever will ever make a promise, because I'm going to give you a chance to make some commitment, right? So any kind of commitment you make, that's going to be towards you. just committing to the first step towards you really speaking the language and being in this multilingual heaven, that first step will then pull you to really do it. When you make a promise to somebody, that promise is taken, and if you put something at stake, that increases the force of commitment. That force is incredible, creates like a new space. And so, here's a question. Who of you like really authentically would want in the next half a year, be on some stage speaking for a minute, 2 or 3 in a language of your choice? Who'd want that? Like that you genuinely want it, not just like, kind of wish, okay, and I want to go surfing, I want to do snowboarding, and maybe a language, but really want it. Just I want to see a show of hands. Who really wants it? Okay, cool. Because I have a gift for you today. I'm at the stage with my company where I don't really need to be on any sales. I'm not really on any sales calls. I'm just really dealing with some deep cases when when my team can't deal with things. That's where I really meet people one-on-one. But today, I chose to take that time for whomever would want that, really work with them, with the master, for about 45 minutes on a language of your choice and really seeing what strategy could be for that. I may not recommend you what we have. We have certain programs and it's really for people who want it, whatever, but I can work with you and really show you, what is possible, what's available, and get to know you and make friends. So here is a time, there's a QR code for you. You can book 45 minutes with me in the next 3-4 days. Because if it's not in the next 3 days, it's going to be too long. So if you really want to take the next step, I promise you this is the best next step you can have in this world. And just, really thank you all for allowing me to be here, especially the Sphere Rocket. That's my first stage in America. And I'm looking forward to the next 3 months and making lots of friends. And just before I go, any burning questions that you want to ask?
How many languages do you speak?
I can start a conversation in 20. But there's some background. I've been a really lonely kid, weird kid. I didn't have any friends when I was little. So I was looking for a way how to relate to people, right? So when I saw languages, that was just like, oh my God. And so I started learning a bunch, right? And it was really painful for me not being able to speak it. And then I can communicate in 7. Like really communicate, and maybe in 3 or 4, really communicate. Like I can entertain my wife's dad's friends, for 3 hours in a izakaya in Japan, but I can't talk deeply about, any topic. I can just kind of be superficial, right? But in Spanish, I could have this whole session with the same level, right? With Russian, for example, I can understand a lot and I can relate, but I'm going to speak half English, half Russian. But I still count it as a communication language, so I can still do it. Yeah.
Just a quick question, because if we learn Tagalog, and just to be able to better communicate with our assistants and that, is it a Latin-based language or is it something different?
Tagalog is definitely Latin-based language. It's a Romanic language that's very close to Spanish. But I don't recommend you to learn Tagalog to speak with your assistants, because their natural language is English with you, right? Yeah. They will never speak Tagalog with you.
Really?
Yeah, okay. You don't switch, and you're not going to get that good that quickly that they would want to, because it's kind of hard work to speak with somebody who's kind of half. They would switch to a language you're both stronger.
A lot of dialects too.
My recommendation is, if you plan your pathway to multilingual heaven, I recommend you in about 3 to 5 years, set yourself to be a 5-language speaker, like a polyglot. It's really awesome, I promise you. And then as the first step, go with the next language, and then take on one more, and then take on one more, and choosing something like Spanish or French first, and get really fluent and building your confidence up is great. Then 2-3 languages that are close, and then you move to something like Chinese, Japanese. Tagalog may or may not be in the first 10. I don't know. Sure. Yeah, but for him definitely, because he needs it, and when he's going to get related to them deeper, and with some of them he's actually going to speak in Tagalog with.
Right. Very good. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Great. So good.
Matej.
Thank you.